end of World War II marked the beginning of an era of peace and prosperity that has lasted 40 years. That's something to think about. Recently, members of every branch of the U.S. Armed Forces, along with civilians, dignitaries, service veterans, reporters, and guests, almost 5,000 in all, including the ship's crew, gathered aboard the aircraft carrier USS Enterprise to celebrate 40 years of peace in the Pacific. The day-long activities held above and below decks of the nuclear-powered aircraft carrier served as both a reminder of the past and a pledge to the future as the host ship anchored out in San Francisco Harbor. The list of participants and invited guests read like a who's who of senior civilian and military officials, including over 30 active-duty flag officers, plus congressmen, civilian dignitaries, and honored guests of the occasion, the service veterans of World War II. About 200 media representatives from the U.S. and Pacific Allied nations were on hand to cover the event. Representing the President of the United States, Vice President George Bush and Mrs. Bush arrived by White House helicopter to join the crowd of almost 1,200 assembled on the flight deck. Secretary of State George Shultz, Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger, and Secretary of Energy John Harrington also flew aboard by helicopter, as well as White House Chief of Staff Donald Regan, Security Advisor Robert McFarlane, and Director of White House Communications Patrick Buchanan. All were given formal military arrival honors. Among those already on board were Chief of Naval Operations Admiral James D. Watkins, Secretary of the Army John O. Marsh, Army Chief of Staff General John A. Wickham, Commandant of the Marine Corps General P.X. Kelly, Commandant of the Coast Guard Admiral James Gracie, Undersecretary of the Navy James F. Goodrich, Commander-in-Chief, U.S. Pacific Fleet, Admiral S.R. Foley, San Francisco Mayor Dianne Feinstein, Alameda Mayor Ann Diamond, former Ambassador to Ghana Shirley Temple Black, and Mrs. Douglas MacArthur, 86 years young. The list goes on and includes 9 World War II Medal of Honor winners, for whom a special wardroom reception was held following the formal flight deck ceremony. The Peace in the Pacific ceremony was held on August 14, 1985, 40 years to the day after Japanese officials agreed to the terms of surrender. The formal surrender ceremony was conducted aboard USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay on September 2, 1945, which came to be known as VJ Day. Navy Chaplain Roland W. Falk, who 40 years ago gave the invocation aboard Missouri at the signing of the surrender, remembers that day well.
Very dark day. Just as the surrender ended, it seemed like somebody pulled back a curtain up in the clouds, and here came the sun shining right down on the Missouri. It lit up like a Christmas tree.
It was a time for recalling the past and for planning the future. Chief of Naval Operations Admiral James Watkins spoke of a plan he called Peace Through Strength.
Our goal is to continue to earn the peace a generation of heroes paid for in full 40 years ago. Our plan simply acknowledges that while might does not make right, peace can only be obtained through strength. That while intervention and armed aggression is not our chosen course, strength of conviction and determination of purpose can see us through difficult times. One of the architects of this plan, our Secretary of Defense, well remembers some 45 years ago when he had to train with wooden sticks, simulating rifles, because that was the best this nation could provide our military people.
Secretary of Defense Weinberger recalled General MacArthur's plan for freedom, tolerance, and justice, and spoke of the Japanese-American alliance, which has grown from a peace that was created 40 years ago.
America's devotion to peace has been the source of our magnanimity toward Japan. Japan and America now are partners, and we're both committed to the preservation of democratic values. We're both determined to defend against an expanding Soviet threat.
The Peace in the Pacific celebration also provided opportunity to recognize and applaud distinguished World War II veterans of U.S. military service.
Well, among our very distinguished Pacific veterans is our own Vice President, George Bush. His war record was and remains an example and a model for us all. At 18 years old, he was commissioned as the Navy's youngest pilot in June of 1943.
Vice President Bush flew 58 combat missions as a carrier-based bomber pilot and was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for heroism after being shot down dangerously close to the enemy island Chichijima. Before Vice President Bush addressed the audience, a flotilla of 7 ships, appropriately led by the battleship USS New Jersey, passed in review. New Jersey was the flagship of the Fifth Fleet when the Japanese surrendered. Following New Jersey were Coast Guard cutter USS Midget, Navy submarine USS Blueback, nuclear-powered guided missile cruiser USS Arkansas, amphibious tank landing ship USS Frederick, amphibious transport dock ship USS Duluth, and representing the U.S. Merchant Marines, America's last operating World War II Navy Liberty ship, SS Jeremiah O'Brien. In his address, the Vice President remarked that in 1941, Japan had caught the United States woefully unprepared for war, and that Americans should pledge that they will never fall prey to complacency and unpreparedness again. The emphasis of his speech, however, was on peace.
40 years ago, the killings stopped. The guns were silent. The bombs dropped no more. And the quiet fear that so many of us had known for so long, that our nation had known for so long, was at last over. Of course, those that we defeated knew another fear. But when we finished burying our dead, an amazed world watched, as instead of taking vengeance, we sought to rebuild our former enemy and establish freedom where there had been none. The blessings of liberty come at great cost. Those who came before us paid the price for what we now enjoy. Those who gave the last full measure of devotion will not have died in vain as long as the United States of America continues to be the land of the free and the home of the brave. It's all in our hands now. Thank you. And God bless you all.
In honor of those who gave their lives, Chaplain Roland W. Falk offered a prayer while the congregation paid a tribute to the fallen.
Let us pray. Eternal God, we pause here to honor and pay tribute to all of those in the armed forces who have fallen in the wars of the past. They died protecting and defending our beloved homeland and the ideals which have guided and nourished our nation. They did not die in vain.
After the commemorative wreath was committed to the sea, a 21-gun salute, also in honor of the war dead, was sounded by the U.S. Army from nearby Crissy Field. The tribute was followed by a tri-service flyby, Navy F-14 Tomcats, followed by Marine Corps AV-8C Harriers, and Air Force F-15 Eagles, flying the missing man formation in honor of those lost in the war. After the pageantry of the outdoor ceremonies, further services and festivities continued below deck.
That I obey the orders of the President of the United States.
That I obey the orders of the President of the United States.
And the orders
In the Admiral's flag cabin, 11 USS Enterprise sailors enjoyed the honor of being re-enlisted by Vice President Bush.
and the Uniform Code of Military Justice.
According to regulations and the Uniform Code of Military Justice.
So help me God.
So help me God.
So pleased to have the chance to do this.
Many of the guests made their way to the hangar bay, which had been converted to a hands-on museum of naval aircraft. A souvenir shop displayed mementos of the event. Guests enjoyed a buffet luncheon and relaxed as a joint San Francisco-San Diego Navy Band and Marine Corps Drum and Bugle Corps from 29 Palms provided sounds of an era gone by, with the big band sounds of Glenn Miller and Tommy and Jimmy Dorsey. How did the guests feel after experiencing the first of its kind celebration of peace aboard a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier?
I was in seventh heaven today.
I think it's great to bring all of the people that they have brought together, military and the civilians, to let us see that we do still have a strong military might.
It makes me reflect on my father in World War II and what he went through.
I'm proud of the United States, and I'm glad that we can get along with other countries this long without any wars at all. And I hope it keeps on going on through other generations.
Well, it's an excellent idea to celebrate peacetime instead of war, right?
After all, that's one of the longest stretches of peace in our time, 40 years.
The more years of peacetime we can celebrate, the better.